class 8. Today we will continue the next part of the text, right? So, yesterday you were asking who is Connie or who wrote the letter to whom, right? All these things. So, actually, Jim McPherson, right, wrote the letter to Connie McPherson, right? And the date was December 26, 1914, as you have already studied, right? So now he was addressing the letter to his wife as Dearest Connie. Okay. I write to you in a much happier frame of mind. Means I am very much happy. I am right now in very much happy frame of mind. Frame of mind means state of mind, right? Because something wonderful has just happened. Something wonderful. Wonderful means beautiful. That is kind of spectacular. Things has just particular thing, right? Has just happened. Means has occurred, happened. That I must tell you about at once. Means Jim McPherson was writing the letter to his wife, right, to tell her about the wonderful thing, right, that had happened that day. So now Jim was explaining, describing the event. We were all standing in our trenches yesterday morning. So they were standing in their trenches. What is trenches? Standing to means taking the positions. They were the soldiers of army, okay, of English army, British army, right? And they were taking up the positions. And trenches means long, deep ditches in the ground where soldiers hide from the enemy. Means there were trenches where they used to hide and they used to take positions to fight with the other soldiers, enemy soldiers, right? Yesterday morning, Christmas morning, that was, means 25th of December. It was crisp and quiet all about. Crisp means here very much good, kind of dry, very pleasant atmosphere, and quiet all about. Quiet means peaceful all about. As beautiful a morning as I have ever seen. So that was very beautiful morning. As cold and frosty as a Christmas morning should be. Means 25th December, so winter, so cold, frosty, right? Quiet, very much very good morning. So means you must understand this point, the explanation of the morning. How did the author explain the morning? Or Jim, how did Jim explain the morning to his wife, Connie, right? I should like to be able to tell you that we began it. Means Jim was saying that I should like to be able to tell you. Means he wanted to tell her that they began that. But the truth, I am ashamed to say, is that Fritz began it. Means first he was telling that they began it. Next he was saying that he was ashamed to say. Ashamed means he was very much shy or ashamed to say that Fritz began it. Who is Fritz? Fritz is the name of a German soldier, right? Fritz is the common German name. So means kind something was going on. Means that time the fight was going on, the war was going on between Germans and the British. So first he said they began it. Next he said no, Fritz means one German soldier began it. First someone saw a white flag waving from the trenches opposite. Opposite means the enemy trenches, right? Someone was waving, showing a white flag. White flag showing means they wanted to make peace with, right? It shows that means you want to make peace with. You don't want to fight. right? That is the symbol in the battlefield, right? Then they were calling out to us from across no man's land. No man's land means the boundary line. Suppose there is one position, the the boundary of one nation ends, and then you have to leave some space, and then after that space, right, another nation will start, right? So that middle part, that is no man's land, right? Calling out to us across means from that another part of that no man's land. Happy Christmas, Tommy. Happy Christmas. They were wishing happy Christmas. When we have got over the surprise, some of us shouted back, same to you, Fred, same to you. Means they were saying Tommy, means by calling the British name, and then from here they were replying that same to you, Fritz. Thought that would be that, right? Means I thought that would be that. Means Jim thought that would be fine. We all did. But then suddenly one of them was up there in his great coat and waving a white flag. Then suddenly one German soldier came out of his trenches, and he was wearing great coat. It means kind of big coat because it was winter mornings. That's why coat he was wearing, and waving means showing a white flag. Don't shoot, lads. Lads mean boys, right? Lads, don't shoot. Someone shouted, and no one did, and no one shoot. Then there was another Fritz up on the parapet. Parapet means kind of low protective wall around the side of the trenches. So that is parapet. Another German soldier came. And another. Keep your heads down. Right? Keep your heads down. I told men. Jim was actually the captain, and he ordered his men that keep their head down. Right? I told the men, and it's a trick. Means they were playing a trick. So that's why he said, keep your heads down. But it wasn't. That wasn't a trick. One of the Germans was waving a bottle above his head, showing a bottle. Yes, means to celebrate the Christmas. It was Christmas Day, Tommy. We have scanaps. Scanaps means that is already written in the book, that a German drink made from grain, right? German drink, kind of wine, right? Scanaps. And we have sausage. Sausage means that dry meat of pork or hen or something. That is dry meat, sausage means, and that is salted meat actually. And we meet you. Yes, so we want to meet you. Yes. By this time, there were dozens of them walking towards us across no man's land. Means dozens means more than 12. They were coming towards us across the no man's land, and not a rifle between them. But they didn't have any rifle, any gun with them. Little Private Morris was the first up. Private Morris, one soldier, the first he was coming. Come on, boys. What are we waiting for? Means they were saying that, come on, boys. And why they were waiting for? And then there was no stopping them. They weren't stopping. I was the officer. I should have stopped them there and then. Jim was saying that I was the officer and I should have stopped them and there and then, I suppose. But the truth is that it never even occurred to me I should. Right? So the means Jim thought I should have stopped them, but he didn't think about stopping them. Right? All along their line and ours, I could see men walking slowly towards one another. Then there came a boundary line between these two nations, right? And they were walking here and there. Means that British soldiers were going towards German soldiers. German soldiers were coming towards British soldiers. Grey coats, khaki coats meeting in the middle. Means grey coats, right? So grey of the German, khaki of this British, and they were meeting one another in the middle, and I was one of them. I was part of this. In the middle of war, we were making peace. So the war was going on, but they were making peace. When? In the Christmas day, right? You cannot imagine, dearest Connie, My feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer who approached me had outstretched hands, outstretched, right? So you cannot imagine, you can think he was addressing to his wife. My feelings as I looked into the eyes of the Fritz officer. He was looking at the Fritz officer who approached me, means who came towards me, and hand outstretched means he wanted to make one handshake, right? Hands Wolf, he said, gripping my hand after holding my hands, hands Wolf, right? Name kind of, and warmly holding it. I was from Dusseldorf, right? I play the cello in the orchestra. Happy Christmas. Cello means kind of musical instrument like a large violin. So he said he means introduced himself as a cello player, means he played cello in the orchestra, and he said wished Happy Christmas. Captain Jim Macpherson, I replied. He said his name was Hans Wolf, and then this man replied, my name is Captain Jim Macpherson, I replied. And Happy Christmas to you too. Means again, Jim also addressed him, Happy Christmas too. I am a school teacher from Dorset in the west of England, and he said that he was a school teacher, right? School teacher in the west of England. Actually, so who was the school teacher? Jim Macpherson was the school teacher. He introduced himself because Hans Wolf introduced himself as a cello player, means he played cello in the orchestra. That's why he also introduced himself as a school teacher in the west of England. Ah, Dorset, he smiled. I know this place. He said, I know this place. I know it very well. We shared my rum ration and his excellent sausage. So they were sharing their rum, kind of drink, wine, and excellent sausage, that dry meat, salted meat. And we talked. Connie, how we talked. He spoke almost perfect English. But it turned out that he had never set foot in Dorset. He said he knew that place, but he never came to Dorset, never even been to England, never came to England. That German soldier never came to England. Who was saying that? Hans Wolf was saying that to Jim Macpherson. He had learned all he knew of England from school. He knew about England from school and from reading books in English, right? So by reading English books and from school, he knew about England and Dorset. His favorite writer was Thomas Hardy. Thomas Hardy, right? His favorite book was Far from the Madding Crowd, one novel of Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd. So out there with no man's land, we talked about Bathsheba, Gabriel Oak, Sergeant Troy, and Dorset. And there they talked about Bathsheba. Bathsheba was actually the heroine of that novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, right? Then they were talking about whom? Gabriel Oak. He was kind of farmer, but the soldier, means sorry, the hero of that farmer, but hero of that novel, Far from the Madding Crowd. And then Sergeant Troy. Sergeant Troy was actually the Sergeant Francis Troy, the villain of Far from the Madding Crowd, of that book, right? So Bathsheba was the beautiful young heroine of Far from the Madding Crowd. Gabriel Oak, a farmer, a shepherd. Gabriel Oak is the hero of Far from the Madding Crowd, and Sergeant Troy is the sergeant. Francis Troy is the villain of that book, right? And they talked about Dorset. He had a wife and one son born just 6 months ago. So he had a wife and his son born just 6 months ago. As I looked about me, there were huddles of khaki and grey everywhere. Huddles means the mixture of khaki and grey. That means the German soldiers and the British soldiers were mingling themselves, were just wishing Happy Christmas, and they were talking to each other or one another, right? All about no man's land, smoking, laughing, talking, drinking, eating, and they were doing all these things. Hans Wolf and I shared what was left of our wonderful Christmas cake. They shared their Christmas cake also. Connie, he thought the marzipan was the best he had ever tasted. Marzipan was the actually the kind of food, right? So marzipan that he had ever tasted. Marzipan, sweet covering on a cake made from sugar, eggs, and almonds. So you can see that a sweet covering on a cake made from sugar, eggs, and almonds. So marzipan cake, and best he had ever tasted. And I agreed. We agreed about everything, and he was my enemy. There never was a Christmas party like it only, and there was never any kind of Christmas party before that. So we will stop over here.